Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen really quickly. And we'll get started. So I am Laura Hamilton. I am an area HR administrator on the Spokane campus, and I'm excited that you guys have joined for the session today. I actually was able to put together some little mini sessions that I've used previously with teams and departments that I'm working with on some just really quick work that can be done within departments independent of a larger structure and organization to make some really effective changes for the teams that I work with. So one of the things that I do want to talk about is what is an effective team. So effective teams consist of groups of people who are interdependent. They share a common objective. They offer each other heartfelt support. And I think that's something right now with the things that are going on just in the country and with the current pandemic, it's really important that we are focusing on offering each other heartfelt support. Effective teams share mutual respect for one another. They're willing to sacrifice for each other, and they feel genuine empathy for each other's successes and failures. A lot of the work that was done by an organization that I had a great opportunity to work with for a very long period of time was actually research into what made up most effective teams for organizations. And these were a lot of the areas that they were able to pinpoint through that research. There are different types of teams. So we have the country club teams that individuals are happy, but people are typically silent about issues that arise, and they make it all okay. Those teams tend to be a little bit less productive in being able to make changes and move information forward in an effective way. We have teams that are the complainer teams. So they do little work and it's we versus others, and tend to be a little bit of a competition, but through a this is what we do and they're not contributing. There are teams that are people-centered, so work is less important than the people who are on the team. Those teams, the country club, the complainer, and the people-centered teams do tend to be teams where the work isn't as much of a focus. Then we have teams that are going to be very work-centered. People are less important, and it is all about the work that's being done. There may be teams that have infighting. So on the opposite side of the complainer is infighting teams where it's not we versus others, but it's me versus others, and having that sort of a environment within the team. And then we have teams that would be the sweatshop teams. People are generally in those teams unhappy. They tend to be silent about what some of the issues are, and those teams may end up spinning their wheels on different processes and not really able to embrace changes that they may face. And so on one side, we have teams where there's no work being done, and on the other side, we have teams where really the people and the team itself isn't important. And the best balance that we can find is actually to have a team that does meet that very fine line of between the work and the team. So recognizing the importance of the people, but also focusing on what is the mission and the goals of the team that we're trying to accomplish. So as we look at that, there is work that each individual within a team, and this doesn't have to be an exercise that an entire area adopts. This is something that could be done in smaller teams, and again, even committees and work groups could have some of these different aspects that they're looking at. So all teams that you work within, and there would be varied teams throughout the day, do fit somewhere in a continuum between being a vital team and a team that's moving towards death. And so some of the dynamics of how that looks, teams that are vital are going to support the team mission and the goals. One of the important aspects of that is ensuring that the work's been done to really call out what the mission and what the goals of the team would be. They utilize the strengths within the team, and they recognize that different individuals who have been added to the team have been added because of the strengths and the skills that they have to offer, and those are really utilized to do the work in the most effective way. Vital teams show appreciation for each other, and they show support for each other. So as there are successes within the team, those are being recognized in an open way and really celebrated. And there's effective communication in vital teams. When we're moving to the other side of the continuum, teams that are moving towards death or who are living in that space are teams that have gossip, that have a lot of micromanagement that's happening without a good level of people being able to engage and utilize their skill sets in the most effective way, which does really lead to a reluctance of people being willing to help. There typically is a lack of communication, and oftentimes there's a lack of delegation. So each team exists somewhere in a continuum of either being a really vital team or, again, living kind of in that death space as a team. They're somewhere on that continuum, but they're continually moving in one way or another. And sometimes we'll have different things that arise as a team that we have opportunities where we can either move one way or another based on those different struggles, concerns, and issues that might come up. So what can we do as team members to really help to move our team toward vitality? Because I think that's everybody's goal. I really believe that people do not come to work with an intention of, how can I make things miserable today? They have the intention of really wanting to do a good job and really wanting to advance the mission of the university. So the important steps of how each individual, because we all have accountability for how our teams work, can go through some processes, is to do some analysis. So what do we honestly have happening in our team? And what is our perception as to why that's occurring? Now, obviously, if this activity can be done within each individual team, you're going to get varying perspectives, and you're going to get a lot better outcome to move towards goals, strategy, and accountability. But this is an activity that can be done independently as well, to do some really introspective thinking about our role on that team and changes that we can make. So to move teams towards vitality, we do need to start with that analysis of what's working and what's not working. The analysis really should be conducted both on the team itself, but also on the work that needs to be accomplished. And sometimes when we're doing analysis of different teams that we're on, we forget one aspect or another. And so the really quick and easy analysis matrix is, what do we honestly have happening and why? What are those things that are happening that are moving us toward vitality for our team and for the work? And what are the issues or behaviors that are happening that are moving the team towards that death spectrum? And what is that that's happening on the team and with the work? Sometimes you will see with teams that on the team side of things, things are moving toward vitality, but on the work side of things, things might be moving towards death. And so really doing a quick assessment to identify what those are will help you to then work with the team, or on your own, set some short-term and long-term goals that would allow you to move towards a strategy and an implementation. So doing a quick assessment, what are the team's strengths that you're able to identify through that vitality section, and what are the team's opportunities to improve as you've identified areas where there are issues or behaviors happening in that death section. So again, these are activities that don't have to be done as a really big overarching process, but is something that could really be a step toward that, or an intermediate step as you're waiting for a more formal process to occur. What can we do now that we've analyzed and we have a list of areas of strengths and opportunities? We can set some goals. One of the goals that I will sometimes see teams forget to account for is, we can really do a lot of work in teams by capitalizing the strengths that we have as a team. Instead of only focusing on those areas of opportunity, we can move a lot more work forward by really using those strengths to our advantage. And so now that you've identified those areas of strength, you've identified the opportunities, can you use the strengths to lessen the gap with some of the opportunities? And what would you like to see change in the team? And how can you set a measurable goal to achieve it? One of the areas that I like to remind teams that I work with is setting SMART goals that are realistic, they're measurable, they're attainable, they're very specific is important because as we see later, that becomes much easier to implement the accountability piece if we have that level of specificity. So how do we look at the strategy? How will we get there? So really looking at what goals can be accomplished that have a high impact. You may end up with a list of 20 different goals that you want to accomplish, but is it realistic to try to tackle all of those at once? And so really putting together a strategy of what are the goals that can be accomplished that have the highest level of impact and you have the highest amount of control over. And that is an area where we as individual contributors to a team can really look at goals that we have an ability to engage in a high area of control. We have a level of independence to impact certain areas because of the scope of our positions that would have a high impact on our overall team. Then you can look as a team, what are the areas of high impact that that team has control over? What are the goals that you would like to accomplish that you need buy-in in order to move ahead? And how do you most effectively engage in those conversations? If you are looking at your individual contributor areas and you have things that you would like to move ahead on, but they may not necessarily be within the scope of authority and level of independence, how do you have the conversations with other members of the team where you can gain that approval to be able to move some of that forward? And then what resources are required to achieve the goals? Really thinking through and making sure that you have the buy-in for those resources that might be necessary, whether they be people resources, if they're financial resources, if it's moving around resources within a team, really again to capitalize on the skill sets of different members, what would be available to really achieve those goals. The most important part of this, and where I see oftentimes that these small movements that can happen within a team fall apart, is the accountability piece of things. And so the structure that I really like to recommend and suggest for teams is it's the WDWBW. It's the who does what by when. So really defining, as you've set the goals and you've made some decisions either for yourself or as a team, you've made some decisions on what those goals would be and how you would move some of those initiatives forward, really keeping track of who has the accountability and ownership for each piece of the strategy to be able to move this information forward. What exactly is it that they're going to be doing, and what's the time frame within which they have to accomplish it? And that then allows you to engage in a follow-up. So as you have meetings where you're following up on the strategy that you've put together, or if you've determined that you'd like to make some of those changes independently, being able to provide some follow-up and information to your direct supervisor on what you're doing and what you feel the impact of that has been, and being able to follow up with them is really important to do to make sure that you're really meeting the goals of what you set out to achieve. So now you have this piece of it done. Now what? You've been able to move the scale, hopefully more towards the vitality. Really the best practice at that point is to go back to the start of that entire process and to go back to a piece of an analysis because of the changes that have occurred either as a team or as an individual contributor and things you've been able to achieve. what can you go back and analyze now to say, okay, where do we take those next steps? Or can you go back to some of the goals that you may have not originally had buy-in for, or you may have not had a high ability of control over those areas? And can you obtain that buy-in? Or can you start to lean into some of the areas where you may not have a high area of control to start to engage in some processes where you can move those goals through some of these same processes? So that's just a really quick and easy way as we have some differentiated ways that we're engaging in our work right now, that we, again, as individual contributors, as well as our multiple teams that we may be working on, can engage in really leading our teams to more of a space of productive and efficient and effective teams. So thank you all for taking the time to plug in for a few minutes, and hopefully I'll see you all again next Wednesday.